This is the richest family that owns North Carolina, inside their underground secrets. Here are the richest families that own North Carolina, and the secret they're hiding underground are wilder than you'd expect. We're talking about a tobacco heir who was found shot dead at his own mansion in a mystery nobody has solved in 90 years. A quiet family that swallowed Silicon Valley Bank whole to become one of the biggest banks in America. And a software billionaire so rich he could buy every other name on this entire list twice over and barely feel it. Let's get into it. Number 8. The Jordan family. We have to start with the most famous name on this entire list, because when you talk about North Carolina and greatness in the same sentence, there's really only one place your mind goes. Michael Jordan was born in Brooklyn, but his family moved him down to Wilmington when he was just a little kid. And it was on those North Carolina courts that the greatest basketball player who ever lived got his start, though you'd never have guessed it at the time. Here's the detail that I still find almost impossible to believe, given how it all turned out. As a sophomore at Laney High School, Michael Jordan got cut from the varsity team, passed over for a taller kid, and the story goes that he took that rejection so personally that he's been quietly using it as fuel for the last 40 years. Whoever made that cut has to live with being the answer to the most brutal trivia question in sports. That chip on his shoulder carried him to the University of North Carolina, where, as a freshman, he hit the winning shot in the 1982 National Championship, and from there, straight into 6 NBA titles and a level of global fame that no athlete had ever really touched before. But the reason he's on a list about wealth rather than a list about sports comes down to one genius decision. Instead of just cashing endorsement checks like everyone else, Jordan negotiated a royalty deal with Nike, and that little sneaker line called Air Jordan grew into a brand pulling in billions every single year, still paying him somewhere around $150 million annually, even though he hasn't laced up in over 2 decades. Then he did the thing that actually made him a billionaire, buying the Charlotte Hornets back in 2010 and selling his majority stake in 2023 at a valuation of roughly $3 billion, which was more than 10 times what he paid, a return that would make a Wall Street trader weep with envy. Today, his fortune sits somewhere between $3.5 and $4 billion, making him the richest retired athlete on the planet. And while he spends most of his time in Florida these days, his roots and his championship banner will always belong to North Carolina. From a man who conquered the court, we move to a man who built his empire on the racetrack, and who did it while carrying a grief most of us couldn't imagine. Number 7. The Hendrick family. Number 7 is the Hendrick family, and if you know anything about NASCAR, you know that Rick Hendrick isn't just successful, he's practically the sports version of the New York Yankees. Born in the tiny town of Warrenton, North Carolina, Rick fell in love with cars and engines as a boy, and by the time he was just 26 years old, he'd become the youngest Chevrolet dealer in the entire country, which was the seed of what is now Hendrick Automotive Group, one of the largest privately held car dealership empires in America, with well over 100 franchises, more than 10,000 employees, and revenue that runs into the billions every year. The man sells and services an astonishing number of cars, and that business alone would be enough to land him on this list. But it's what he built on the racetrack that made him a legend. Hendrick Motorsports, headquartered up in Concord, has become the winningest team in the entire history of NASCAR's Premier Series, with more championships than anyone can comfortably count, having fielded cars for icons like Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and Kyle Larson. His personal net worth hovers right around $1 billion. And honestly, given that his companies generate somewhere near $10 billion in annual sales, plenty of people suspect the real number runs higher than that. And yet, when you read about Rick Hendrick, the money is never really the headline. His story carries a weight that puts all of it in perspective. In October of 2004, a plane carrying members of the Hendrick organization to a race in Virginia crashed, and it killed 10 people, among them Rick's own son, Ricky, who was only 24 and being groomed to run the whole empire one day, along with Rick's brother and 2 of his young nieces. Losing that much of your family and your inner circle in a single afternoon is the kind of tragedy that would break most people completely. And on top of that, this is a man who has also quietly battled leukemia and survived a separate plane crash of his own. That he kept building, kept winning, and kept honoring the people he lost, including a championship car later painted as a tribute to his late son, tells you there's a steel to this family that no amount of money could ever buy. From a fortune forged in the modern world of horsepower, We now travel back in time to the oldest money in the entire state, a tobacco dynasty draped in luxury and shadowed by an unsolved death. Speaking of the kind of mindset that keeps a man building through everything life throws at him, there's a program someone on our team has been curious about called the Billionaire Brain Wave. It's a simple 7-minute audio built around theta brainwave research, the deep focus brain state linked to where big creative ideas come from. You put on headphones once a day, usually with your morning coffee, and that's the whole routine. It's a one-time $39. It comes with bonus guides on money habits and investing basics, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. So testing it costs you nothing if it's not for you. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the story waiting at number 6. Number 6, the Reynolds family. Number 6 takes us all the way back to where big North Carolina money really began, with the Reynolds family and the empire built by a Virginia farm boy named Richard Joshua Reynolds. Back in 1874, he rolled into the little town of Winston with barely anything to his name, set up a tobacco company in a 2-story building smaller than a tennis court that people called the Little Red Factory, and proceeded to change the fortunes of the entire region. His masterstroke came in 1913 with the launch of the Camel cigarette, and the thing absolutely exploded, selling hundreds of millions of packs in its very first year. To give you a sense of the scale, by the mid-1920s more than half of every cigarette smoked in the United States was a Camel, which made R.J. Reynolds, by an enormous margin, the wealthiest man in North Carolina. That wealth built Reynolda, a sprawling 1,000-acre estate that was less of a house and more of its own self-sufficient English village, complete with a power plant, a dairy, schools, and even its own post office, while the Great Depression raged everywhere else and simply stopped at the gates. It's the kind of over-the-top luxury that feels almost mythical today, and much of it still stands, because Reynolda now lives on as a celebrated museum of American art. But every great dynasty seems to carry a dark chapter, and the Reynolds families is a genuine mystery that people in Winston-Salem still argue about to this day. In the summer of 1932, RJ's youngest son, a 20-year-old named Zachary Smith Reynolds, who was married to a glamorous Broadway torch singer, was found shot in the head at Reynolda after a night of partying, and he soon died. The investigation became a national sensation, full of conflicting stories and whispers of tampered evidence, and his own wife was actually charged with his murder before the charges were quietly dropped at the family's request. Almost a century later, nobody can say for certain whether it was murder or suicide, and that unanswered question hangs over the estate to this day. The tobacco fortune eventually flowed into foundations that still give away millions across the region every year, cementing a legacy that shaped the whole state. From the oldest fortune on our list, we jump to a man who proved you don't need tobacco or oil to get rich, because he did it one single dollar at a time. Number 5, the Levine family. Number 5 is the Levine family, and I love this story because it's proof that an empire can be built out of the most humble beginnings imaginable. Leon Levine grew up in small-town North Carolina, and when his father died, 12-year-old Leon had to step up and help run the family's little store, learning the retail trade the hard way long before most kids his age were thinking about anything at all. He carried those lessons with him, and in 1959, at just 22 years old, he opened the very first Family Dollar store in Charlotte with a $6,000 investment that represented essentially every penny he had to his name. The concept was almost embarrassingly simple: just sell everyday goods cheap. But Leon understood his customers better than anyone, and that one little shop multiplied into a discount retail juggernaut of more than 4,000 stores generating well over $1 billion in revenue. He'd taken a single storefront and turned it into one of the great American retail success stories, all without ever losing that plain-spoken, tight-fisted discipline that got him there in the first place. Now here's the part that tells you who Leon Levine really was at his core. When he passed away in 2023 at the age of 85, he left the enormous bulk of his fortune, something in the neighborhood of $2 billion, not to his children but to his foundation, which instantly became one of the largest charitable foundations in the entire state, giving away $100 million a year to healthcare, education, and community causes. He'd actually said, quite plainly, that his kids were comfortable and didn't need any more money, which is a remarkably rare thing to hear from a man of that wealth. His name is now stamped across Charlotte on children's hospitals, cancer institutes, and cultural centers. And after his family endured a heartbreaking personal loss over the years, they became some of the most dedicated funders of mental health care anywhere in the Carolinas. From a fortune built on selling things cheaply, we moved to a family that got quietly, staggeringly rich by doing something far less glamorous: buying up banks. Number 4. The Holding Family. Number 4 is the Holding Family, and I'd bet that most people outside of North Carolina have never even heard their name, which is exactly how they've always liked it. Their empire is First Citizens Bank, and the roots of it stretch back an incredible 125 years, all the way to 1898, when it started life as a tiny operation called the Bank of Smithfield, serving one rural county with just $10,000 in capital. It's about the most modest starting point a financial empire could possibly have. The family took control back in the 1930s, and leadership has passed carefully down through the generations ever since, landing with Frank Holding Jr., who runs the whole thing today alongside his 4 sisters, with the family collectively holding somewhere around half the voting power of the entire company. For decades, they operated in near silence, methodically growing the bank by quietly scooping up smaller lenders that had failed, developing a real specialty in swooping in and cleaning up other people's messes. And then came the moment that put them on the map in the most dramatic way possible. In March of 2023, when Silicon Valley Bank suddenly collapsed in the second-largest bank failure in American history and sent a wave of panic through the entire financial world, it was this quiet North Carolina family that stepped in and bought up its assets, essentially doubling the size of their bank overnight with the stroke of a pen. The result was jaw-dropping. Their stock leapt more than 50% in a single day, the company's market value rocketed past $20 billion, and little old First Citizens, once the 30th largest bank in the country, suddenly vaulted into the top 15, holding more in assets than famous Wall Street names like Morgan Stanley. The family's collective fortune now sits somewhere around $2.5 billion. And what I find so fascinating is how they've stayed almost completely out of the spotlight through all of it, even while dabbling in everything from the state's largest health insurer to, of all things, one of the biggest pickle companies in America. From a family that built quiet wealth by buying banks, we come to a man who built loud wealth in software, and who would honestly rather spend it all on saving the planet. Number 3. The Saul Family. Number 3 is the Saul family, and John Saul is probably the most low-key billionaire you'll ever come across, which is remarkable considering the scale of what he helped create. Back in 1976, while he was studying statistics at North Carolina State University, John teamed up with a fellow researcher and a couple of others to turn a project for analyzing agricultural data into a company called SAS. That company grew into the largest privately held software firm on the entire planet, a data analytics powerhouse used by tens of thousands of banks, governments, and insurance companies around the world. And John's roughly one-third ownership stake has made him worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 billion. But if you sat down and talked to John Saul, I suspect the software would barely come up, because his real passion has always pointed in a completely different direction. This is a man who took part in the very first Earth Day back in 1970 and simply never stopped caring, going on to serve on the boards of heavyweight organizations like the Nature Conservancy, the World Wildlife Fund, and the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Through his family foundation, he and his wife have poured nearly $300 million into protecting the environment, improving global public health, and fighting poverty in some of the most vulnerable corners of the world, from the rivers of Africa to the forests of the Amazon. There's something genuinely refreshing about a tech billionaire whose idea of a good time is protecting a watershed in Mozambique rather than buying another yacht. And the Sauls have even signed the Giving Pledge, committing to give the majority of their wealth away. He's quietly one of the richest men in North Carolina, and he seems to spend most of his energy making sure the planet is a little better off for it. And here's a detail that sets up where we're headed, because John Saul built that software empire with a partner, and that partner didn't just get rich too. He became the single wealthiest person in the entire state. But before we get to him, we have to talk about the man sitting one spot higher, who turned a video game you have almost certainly played into a colossal fortune. Number 2. The Sweeney Family. Number 2 is the Sweeney family, and Tim Sweeney is living proof that in the modern world, you can build a multi-billion-dollar empire out of pure imagination. He started tinkering with game development back in 1991, coding away in his parents' house under a company he eventually named Epic, and in 1999 he moved the whole operation down to Cary, North Carolina, which turned out to be one of the smartest relocations in tech history. Today, Tim Sweeney is worth roughly $5.7 billion, making him the second richest person in the state, trailing only one man we'll get to in a moment. You know his work even if you don't know his name, because Epic Games created Fortnite, the cultural phenomenon that has pulled in hundreds of millions of players and reshaped what a video game can even be, blending gaming, concerts, and socializing into one giant digital world. And underneath a huge chunk of the entire industry sits another Epic creation, the Unreal Engine, the powerful software that runs countless other video games and has increasingly crept into Hollywood, powering the effects and virtual sets of major films and television shows. In other words, Sweeney's technology is quietly everywhere, whether you realize it or not. He's also become famous for picking enormous fights and refusing to back down, most notably taking on Apple in a massive legal war over the fees the company charges in its App Store, a battle that reshaped how people think about the power of the big tech platforms. But here's the twist that I think is genuinely wonderful, because for all his billions, one of Sweeney's great personal passions is buying up tens of thousands of acres of wild, untouched North Carolina land purely to protect it from development forever. So you've got two of the richest men in the state. Both made their fortunes in software, and both would apparently rather preserve a forest than flaunt their wealth. Which brings us, at last, to the man who out-earned every single one of them, and who happens to be Tim Sweeney's neighbor in the very same town. Number 1. The Goodnight family. Number 1 is the Goodnight family, and Jim Goodnight isn't just the richest man in North Carolina. He is richer than nearly everyone else on this list combined, sitting on a personal fortune estimated at around $13 billion. And the beautiful thing about it is that if you passed him on the street, you'd never in a million years guess it, because this is a soft-spoken former professor, not a flashy tycoon. Remember that SAS company we talked about with John Saul a moment ago? Well, Jim Goodnight was the driving partner behind it, the two of them meeting at North Carolina State back in the 1970s while Jim was pursuing his PhD, and together turning a tool for crunching farm data into the most valuable privately held software company on Earth. Jim owns the lion's share of SAS, which is exactly why his fortune towers so far above everyone else's, and the company pulls in billions in revenue year after year, serving the biggest institutions in the world. But what truly sets Goodnight apart is the way he chose to run the place, because he built SAS into a legend, not just for its software, but for how ridiculously well it treats its people. We're talking about a corporate campus with its own on-site healthcare center, its own pharmacy, subsidized childcare, gyms, and cafeterias. The kind of workplace that has landed SAS at the very top of national lists of the best companies to work for. His philosophy was refreshingly simple, that if you take care of your people, they'll take care of your customers. And it worked so well that his employee turnover became the envy of the entire industry. For decades, he did something almost unheard of in the tech world, keeping the company fiercely private and independent, turning away buyers and refusing to go public so he could run it exactly the way he saw fit. And only in recent years has SAS even begun exploring that path, all while pivoting hard into the world of artificial intelligence. When you step back and look at the whole picture, it's honestly one of the great American business stories, because two graduate students sat down to analyze agricultural data almost 50 years ago, and one of them quietly built himself into the richest man in the entire state of North Carolina, without ever once needing to shout about it. And those were the 8 richest families in North Carolina. What strikes me most, looking back at all of them, is how much of this staggering wealth hides in plain sight, because the biggest fortune in the state belongs to a company most people can't name. The boldest banking empire in the country is run by a family nobody's heard of, and the grandest old tobacco mansion is now quietly welcoming tourists as an art museum. This state seems to breed a very particular kind of billionaire, the sort who would rather build something lasting and let the money speak for itself. So I'm curious which of these stories caught you most off guard, whether it was Jordan getting cut from his high school team, the century-old mystery still hanging over Reynolds, or that soft-spoken professor sitting on $13 billion. Drop your answer down in the comments. Give this a like if any of these fortunes surprised you, And stay tuned with Global Status, because there's always another empire waiting to be uncovered.